They say a mother's heart can break in silence, and mine shattered completely the day I discovered my only son got married without telling me. I'm sitting here now 3 months later, still trying to make sense of how 26 years of unconditional love could be erased so effortlessly. My name is Abigail Richardson, and this is the story of how I learned that being a good mother sometimes means absolutely nothing to the child you raised. It started on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I remember because I was folding Tobias's old baby clothes that I'd kept stored in the attic, thinking maybe one day I'd have grandchildren to pass them down to. The irony still makes my chest tight with pain. My phone rang, and I saw Isabella's name flash across the screen. Isabella Whitmore, my son's girlfriend of 2 years, a petite blonde with a trust fund and an attitude that could freeze water. I'd tried so hard to like her, to see what Tobias saw in her sharp blue eyes and practiced smile. But there was always something cold there, something that made me feel like I was intruding in my own son's life whenever she was around. "Hello, Isabella," I answered, balancing the phone against my shoulder while I continued folding tiny yellow onesies. "Oh, Abigail," she said, her voice carrying that tone I'd grown accustomed to, the one that made my name sound like something distasteful she had to get out of her mouth quickly. "I was just calling to check something with you." I should have known. Isabella never called me just to chat. In 2 years, we'd never had a single conversation that wasn't absolutely necessary. Not about the weather, not about how Tobias was doing, nothing. But I was still trying then, still believing that maybe we could find some common ground for my son's sake. "Of course, honey. What do you need?" "Well, Tobias mentioned you might want to know about our wedding date, but honestly, I told him it wasn't necessary to bother you with the details since it's going to be such a small, intimate affair." My hands stopped moving. The baby clothes suddenly felt heavy in my lap. "Wedding date?" I repeated slowly. "When did you two get engaged?" There was a pause, and I could practically hear her eyes rolling through the phone. "Oh, we got married yesterday," she said casually, like she was telling me about a dentist appointment. "It was just for special people, you know, very exclusive. Just our closest friends and immediate family that really matter." The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of my kitchen table so hard my knuckles went white. "You got married? Yesterday?" "Yes. It was lovely. A beautiful ceremony at the country club. My father walked me down the aisle, and my mother cried. You know how emotional these things can get. Anyway, I just wanted to confirm that Tobias had mentioned it to you, since he said he was going to call you this week sometime. My son, my baby boy, the child I carried for 9 months, delivered in a room with no one else by my side because his father had died just 3 months before he was born. The little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who made me Mother's Day cards with his tiny handprints, who told me I was the most beautiful mama in the world, even when I was exhausted from pulling double shifts at the hospital to pay for his school clothes. That son had gotten married, and I found out from his wife, not even from him. "Abigail, are you there?" "Yes," I whispered, because it was all I could manage. "Good. Well, I should go. We're supposed to meet with the wedding photographer to look at proofs. Take care." She hung up before I could say another word. I sat there in my kitchen, surrounded by baby clothes and the smell of the sweet potato pie I'd been baking for Tobias, his favorite, and felt something inside me die. Not dramatically, not with screaming or tears, just a quiet, devastating death of everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my son. 26 years ago, I was 19 years old and pregnant, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Ashbourne after my husband Samuel died in a construction accident. I had $200 to my name, no family nearby, and a determination that my child would have everything I never did. I worked as a nursing assistant during the day and cleaned office buildings at night while I put myself through nursing school. When Tobias had colic and cried for hours, I walked the floors with him, singing the same lullabies my grandmother had sung to me. When he started school and the other kids made fun of his second-hand clothes, I worked extra shifts to buy him new ones. When he wanted to play Little League and I couldn't afford the equipment, I picked up a weekend job at a diner and made it happen. I never missed a game, never missed a school play, never missed a parent-teacher conference. When he got into college, I took out loans and worked overtime for 4 years to make sure he graduated debt-free. I was so proud the day he walked across that stage, my beautiful, brilliant son with his engineering degree and his bright future ahead of him. And now he was married, and I wasn't even important enough to be told about it beforehand. I called him that evening. My hands were shaking as I dialed his number, and I had to try 3 times because I kept hitting the wrong buttons. "Hey, Mom," he answered, and his voice sounded exactly the same as always. Warm, familiar, like nothing in the world had changed. "Tobias," I said, and then stopped. "How do you ask your child why they didn't invite you to their wedding? How do you say those words without sounding pathetic and desperate? What's up? You sound weird?" Isabella called me today. Silence. Long, heavy silence that told me everything I needed to know. "Oh," he finally said. "Right. I was going to call you about that." "Were you?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "When exactly? After the honeymoon? After the first anniversary?" "Mom, don't be dramatic. It wasn't a big deal. We just wanted something simple and private." Simple and private. Those words cut deeper than if he just told me he hated me. At least hatred is an emotion. This was indifference, and that was so much worse. "I'm your mother, Tobias. I know that." "Do you?" "Because I raised you, and somewhere in that process, I thought I taught you that family matters. I thought I taught you respect and love and basic human decency. Look, Mom, Isabella's family has certain expectations about these things. Her parents wanted it to be very traditional, very proper. You know how those people are. Those people. As if I was some kind of outsider, some stranger who wouldn't understand the complexities of proper society. As if I hadn't spent his entire childhood trying to give him every advantage, every opportunity to be successful in any world he chose to enter. What does that mean exactly?" Another pause. "It means it was easier this way. No complications, no drama, just simple, no complications. That's what I was to my son now, a complication." "I see," I said quietly. "Well, congratulations. I hope you'll be very happy." "Mom, don't be like this." "Like what, Tobias? Like a mother who expected to be included in the most important day of her son's life? Like someone who thought she mattered enough to at least receive a phone call? You're making this harder than it has to be." And there it was, the final blow. I was making it hard by having feelings about being excluded from my own son's wedding. I was the problem for caring too much, for expecting too much, for being too much. "You're right," I said. "I am making this hard. I'll try to be easier to manage in the future." "That's not what I meant. I have to go, Tobias. I hope your marriage brings you everything you're looking for." I hung up before he could respond, and then I sat in my kitchen and cried for the first time since his father died. Not the angry tears or the frustrated tears I'd shed over the years when things got tough. These were grief tears, mourning tears, the kind that come when you realize something precious is gone forever, and it's never coming back. The sweet potato pie sat cooling on the counter, and I thought about how many times I'd made that same pie for him, how many times I'd watched his face light up when he came home and smelled it baking, how many conversations we'd had at that same kitchen table, how many problems we'd solved together over slices of pie and glasses of milk. I picked up the pie and walked outside to where Mrs. Carla Jenkins, my elderly neighbor, was watering her roses. She'd been my friend and confidant for 15 years, the closest thing to family I had in Ashbourne besides Tobias. "Carla," I called out, and she looked up with that warm smile that had gotten me through so many difficult times. "Well, hello there, Abigail. What brings you out here with that beautiful pie?" "Take it," I said, holding it out to her. "Please, I made it for someone who doesn't want it anymore." She set down her watering can and walked over to me, her weathered hands taking the pie dish while her eyes searched my face. "Honey, what happened?" And I told her. Everything. About the phone call, about the wedding, about the conversation with Tobias. By the time I finished, we were both sitting on her front porch steps, and she had her arm around my shoulders while I struggled not to cry again. "That boy," she said finally, shaking her head. "That ungrateful, foolish boy." "Maybe I'm overreacting," I said, because part of me still wanted to find a way to make this my fault, to find a reason that would make it hurt less. "Are you kidding me?" Carla's voice was fierce. "Abigail Richardson, you have given that child everything, everything, and he repays you by excluding you from his wedding, By letting that little girl treat you like you're nobody? She's his wife now. She's a spoiled brat who doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as you, and if Tobias can't see that, then he's not half the man you raised him to be. We sat there in the fading light, and I felt something shifting inside me. Not healing. It was too early for that. But something was changing. Some fundamental understanding about my place in the world and what I deserved from the people I loved. "What am I supposed to do now?" I asked. Carla was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "You're going to remember who you were before you became Tobias's mother. You're going to remember that you're a complete person, not just someone's parent. And you're going to start living for yourself instead of for a child who apparently doesn't appreciate what he's been given." That night, I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about Carla's words. For 26 years, my identity had been wrapped up entirely in being Tobias's mother. Every decision, every sacrifice, every dream had been filtered through what was best for him. I'd forgotten who Abigail Richardson was when she wasn't taking care of someone else. But I was about to remember. Because if my son wanted to treat me like I didn't matter, then maybe it was time to stop acting like he was the only thing that did. 3 weeks later, Isabella called me again, and this time, her voice was completely different. Gone was the cold, dismissive tone I'd grown accustomed to. Instead, she sounded almost frantic, with an edge of desperation that I'd never heard before. It was 7:30 in the morning, and I was getting ready for my shift at Mercy General Hospital, where I'd been working as a registered nurse for the past 18 years. "Abigail, thank God you answered," she said, and I almost didn't recognize her voice without its usual condescending lilt. "Isabella? Is everything all right? Is Tobias okay?" Because despite everything, he was still my son, and my first instinct was still to worry about his well-being. "He's fine, physically, but we have a situation, and I really need your help." I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, the same one where I'd been sitting when she told me about the wedding. There was something about the way she said, "need your help," that made my stomach twist with a familiar dread. "What kind of situation?" "Well, Tobias lost his job last Friday." The words hit me like a physical blow. Tobias had been working at Brennan Engineering for 3 years, and he'd always told me how secure his position was, how much his supervisors valued his work. He'd just gotten a promotion 6 months ago. "What happened?" I asked, setting down my coffee cup with shaking hands. "Budget cuts," Isabella said quickly. "It had nothing to do with his performance. They just had to let go of the newest employees, and unfortunately, that included him. But the thing is, we have bills due, and our rent is due tomorrow, and we're a little short this month." A little short. Such a casual way to describe what I was beginning to understand was a financial crisis. "How short?" "Well, our rent is $1,500, and with Tobias not having his last paycheck yet because of some paperwork delays, we only have about $300 in checking right now. $1,200. She was asking me for $1,200 just like that. As if I was an ATM, as if money just appeared in my account whenever someone needed it. "Isabella, that's a lot of money." I know, but it's just temporary. Tobias already has some interviews lined up, and I'm sure he'll find something quickly. We just need to get through this month." I was quiet, thinking. $1,200 was most of my monthly take-home pay. It was my grocery money, my utility bills, my car payment. It was the money I'd been slowly saving to finally take a vacation somewhere, the first real vacation I'd ever planned for myself. "What about your parents?" I asked. "Couldn't they help you out?" The silence that followed was long and telling. "My parents they're going through some financial adjustments right now," she said finally. "Daddy's business has had some setbacks, and they've had to cut back on their discretionary spending." Discretionary spending. That's what I was to Isabella's family. Discretionary spending. But apparently I was essential spending. "Abigail, I wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate, and I promise, the minute Tobias gets a new job, we'll pay you back every penny." There it was. The promise I'd heard so many times before, though never from Isabella. I'd heard it from friends, from co-workers, from neighbors. "I'll pay you back every penny." And sometimes they did. But more often than not, the debt just became an awkward thing that stood between us until the relationship died from the weight of it. But this was different. This was my son's wife, asking for help to keep them from losing their home. "Let me talk to Tobias," I said. Oh, he's not here right now. He's out looking for work, meeting with headhunters and things like that. But he knows I'm calling you. He suggested it, actually. Of course he did. My son, who couldn't be bothered to invite me to his wedding, had no problem suggesting his wife call me when they needed money. The irony was so sharp it could have cut glass. I need to think about this, Isabella. Think about it? Her voice rose, and I heard the first crack in her carefully controlled facade. Abigail, we could lose our apartment. Do you understand that? We could be homeless. Homeless. Such a dramatic word for a couple who could probably call any number of Isabella's well-connected friends or family members for help. But apparently, they'd called me first. Or maybe they'd called everyone else first, and I was the last resort. I understand that housing is important, I said carefully. But I also need to understand how my son, who has a good education and 3 years of experience, ended up in a position where he has no savings to fall back on. Another silence. We've had some expenses, Isabella said defensively. The wedding wasn't free, you know, and we needed to furnish our apartment, and there were honeymoon costs, and my student loans don't pay themselves. The wedding that I wasn't invited to. The honeymoon I heard about through the grapevine. The apartment I'd never been invited to see. The life I'd been systematically excluded from. And now they wanted me to pay for it all. I see, I said. So can you help us? The money needs to be in our account by tomorrow afternoon, or we'll get a late fee on top of everything else. There was something about the way she said it. Not, would you be willing to help us? Or, is there any way you could help us? But, can you help us? As if my ability to help was the only question that mattered. As if my willingness was assumed. I'll call you back in an hour, I said. An hour? Abigail, this is urgent. I really need to know now so I can make other arrangements if necessary. Other arrangements. So I wasn't even their first choice. I was just one option on a list of people they could ask for money. 1 hour, Isabella. I hung up before she could protest further and sat in my kitchen trying to process what had just happened. 3 weeks ago, I wasn't important enough to be included in their wedding. Today, I was important enough to solve their financial problems. I called Carla. She answered on the first ring, probably because she was an early riser like me. That woman has some nerve, Carla said after I explained the situation. The absolute gall of that girl. But what if they really do lose their apartment? What if Tobias ends up homeless? Abigail, honey, listen to yourself. Tobias is a grown man with an engineering degree. Isabella comes from money. You really think they're going to end up sleeping on park benches? They have options. They just want the easiest option, which is getting you to solve their problems for them. I knew she was right, but the mother in me couldn't stop worrying. What if I loan them the money but with conditions? Like a written agreement, a payment plan? What if you don't loan them anything at all? What if you let them figure out their own problems like the adults they claim to be? Carla's words hung in the air, and I realized she was suggesting something that had never occurred to me before, saying no to my son. I've never said no to Tobias. Not about anything important. Maybe that's the problem. After I hung up with Carla, I sat there thinking about all the times I'd said yes to Tobias over the years. Yes to the expensive baseball equipment. Yes to the private tutoring. Yes to the college expenses. Yes to helping him buy his first car. Yes, 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 because that's what good mothers do. They sacrifice and give and support. But when had he ever said yes to me? When had he ever sacrificed anything for my sake? When I called Isabella back an hour later, my hands were steady for the first time that morning. I've thought about your request, I said. Great. When can you transfer the money? If you can do it by 2 o'clock, I can get to the bank and make sure it's in our landlord's account by tomorrow morning. She had it all figured out. The timing, the logistics, everything except actually asking me if I was willing to help. I'm not going to give you the money, Isabella. Silence. Long, shocked silence. I'm sorry, what? I said I'm not going to give you the money. You and Tobias are going to have to figure this out on your own. Are you serious right now? Abigail, we're talking about your son, your only child. You would let him become homeless over $1,200? There it was. The guilt. Served up exactly as I'd expected it. But something had changed in me over the past 3 weeks. Something fundamental that made the guilt feel less heavy than it used to. I'm talking about 2 adults who made the choice to exclude me from their wedding, who made it clear that I'm not part of their family or their decisions. You can't have it both ways, Isabella. You can't treat me like a stranger when it's convenient and like family when you need something. That's completely different, is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I only matter to you when you need my money. Tobias is going to be so disappointed in you. The words were meant to hurt, and they did. But they also made me angry in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be before. You know what disappoints me, Isabella? Finding out about my son's wedding from his wife instead of from him. Being treated like an obligation instead of a mother. Being called only when you need something instead of being included in your lives. We include you? When? When was the last time you or Tobias called me just to talk? When was the last time you invited me over for dinner or to see your apartment or to spend time together? I can't remember, because it's never happened. She was quiet now, and I could hear her breathing getting shorter, more frustrated. So that's it? You're going to let us lose our home because your feelings are hurt? I'm going to let you handle your problems the way adults handle problems. You'll figure it out. Maybe you can ask those special people who were important enough to be invited to your wedding. Abigail, please. I have to go to work now. Good luck with everything. I hung up, and for the first time in 3 weeks, I felt something other than sadness and betrayal. I felt powerful, strong, like I had some control over my own life instead of just being at the mercy of other people's needs and expectations. My phone rang again immediately. Isabella calling back. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again 5 minutes later. This time, it was Tobias. I stared at his name on the screen and felt my resolve wavering. This was my baby, my son, the person I loved more than my own life. How could I let him struggle when I had the power to help him? But then I remembered what Carla had said about letting adults handle their own problems. I remembered Isabella's casual dismissal of my feelings about the wedding. I remembered being called discretionary spending and complications. I let that call go to voicemail too. 20 minutes later, I was in my car driving to work when I decided to listen to the messages. Isabella's was tearful and rambling. Abigail, please, I know we made mistakes, but this isn't just about us. This is about Tobias. This is about family. Please call me back. We really need your help. Tobias's was shorter and colder. Mom, Isabella told me about your conversation. I really hope you'll reconsider this. We wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate. Call me. Neither of them apologized for excluding me from the wedding. Neither of them acknowledged that they'd hurt me or treated me badly. They were both just focused on getting what they needed from me. As I pulled into the hospital parking lot, I realized something that should have been obvious much earlier. They weren't calling me because they loved me or valued me or wanted me in their lives. They were calling me because they saw me as a resource, a solution to their problems, a person who could be counted on to say yes, no matter how badly they treated me. Well, I was done being that person. Starting today, they were going to have to earn my help the same way I'd been earning their respect for years, and failing. For the first time in my adult life, I'd chosen myself over my son's immediate needs, and it felt terrifying and liberating and absolutely right all at the same time. For 2 weeks after I refused to give them the money, my phone didn't ring once. Not from Tobias, not from Isabella, not even a text message. Complete radio silence, as if I'd suddenly ceased to exist in their world. And you know what? For the first few days, that silence felt like freedom. I went to work, came home, made dinner for one, and watched whatever I wanted on television without worrying about whether my phone would ring with some crisis I needed to solve. I read books I'd been meaning to get to for years. I reorganized my closets. I even planted a small herb garden in my backyard, something I'd always wanted to do, but never found the time for. But by the end of the first week, the silence started to feel different, heavier, more pointed. This wasn't just my son being busy with his life. This was punishment for not doing what I was told. The realization hit me one evening as I was watering my newly planted basil. Tobias wasn't just disappointed that I'd said no. He was angry. And his way of dealing with that anger was to cut me out completely, as if I was a service that could be canceled when it stopped meeting his needs. 26 years of unconditional love, and this was how it ended. Not with conversation, not with understanding, not even with an argument. Just silence. I called Carla that night, needing to hear a friendly voice. "How are you holding up, honey?" she asked, and I could hear the concern in her voice. I keep waiting for it to stop hurting, I said, settling into my favorite chair with a cup of tea. I keep thinking that if I just stay busy enough, if I focus on other things, the pain will go away. And it doesn't. It's like losing Samuel all over again, except this time, the person I lost is choosing to be gone. Carla was quiet for a moment. You know, when my daughter and I went through our rough patch 15 years ago, my therapist told me something that stuck with me. What was that? She said that sometimes loving someone means accepting that they might not love you back the way you need them to. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and let them figure out what they really value. But what if they never figure it out? What if this is just who Tobias is now? Then at least you'll know. And you can stop wasting your energy on someone who doesn't appreciate it. After I hung up with Carla, I found myself thinking about the word appreciate. When was the last time Tobias had actually appreciated anything I'd done for him? Not just said thank you out of politeness, but genuinely appreciated the sacrifices and love and support I'd given him? I couldn't remember. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called in sick to work when I wasn't actually sick. I just needed a day to think, to figure out what I was supposed to do with this new reality where my son had written me out of his life. I decided to drive to Willowbrook Cemetery, where Samuel was buried. I hadn't been there in months, and I suddenly felt like I needed to talk to him, to tell him what was happening with our son. Samuel's grave was simple, just a flat marker with his name, his dates, and the words, beloved husband and father. I'd chosen those words 26 years ago, when I still believed that love was enough to protect us from the worst kinds of pain. I sat down on the grass next to his marker and started talking, the way I used to talk to him when he was alive, and we were trying to figure out how to navigate some challenge together. He got married, Sam, I said quietly. Our boy got married, and he didn't even tell me, and now he won't talk to me because I wouldn't give them money when they asked for it. A breeze moved through the oak trees overhead, and for a moment, I could almost imagine it was Samuel's way of responding. I don't know what I did wrong. I thought I raised him to be better than this. I thought I taught him about loyalty and family and treating people with respect. But maybe I didn't. Maybe I just taught him that he could take whatever he wanted from me and never give anything back. The tears came then, hot and angry and full of a grief I hadn't allowed myself to feel fully. I was mourning not just my relationship with Tobias, but the version of him I'd thought I knew. The son who called me just to check in, who valued my opinion, who saw me as more than just a source of financial or emotional support. That son had never really existed. I'd created him in my mind, built him up from hope and wishful thinking and the deep need to believe that all my sacrifices had meant something. After I finished crying, I felt something shift inside me. Not healing exactly, but a kind of clarity I hadn't had before. I'd been waiting for Tobias to give me permission to matter in his life, waiting for him to recognize my worth and treat me accordingly. But maybe that was backwards. Maybe I needed to recognize my own worth first. I drove home and did something I'd never done before. I made a list of all the things I'd wanted to do but hadn't because I was always focused on Tobias's needs first. The list was longer than I'd expected. Take a real vacation somewhere I'd never been. Learn to paint, something I'd always been interested in. Join a book club or social group. Take a cooking class focused on cuisines I'd never tried. Maybe even go on a date. If I could remember how to do that, redecorate my house to reflect my tastes instead of keeping it the same in case Tobias wanted to come home. Consider getting a dog, something I'd always wanted but thought might be too much responsibility. Looking at that list, I realized how much of my life I'd put on hold for a person who apparently didn't want me in his life anyway. The next week, I did something that felt revolutionary. I signed up for a watercolor painting class at the community college. It was scheduled for Tuesday evenings, and it would cost me $60 for the 8-week session. The old me would have hesitated, worried about spending the money on something so frivolous. The old me would have thought about what Tobias might need that $60 for instead. But the new me, the me who was slowly emerging from the wreckage of her expectations, wrote that check without a second thought. On Tuesday evening, I walked into the art classroom feeling nervous and excited and completely out of my element. There were 12 other students, ranging in age from about 30 to 70, and every single one of them seemed more confident than I felt. Our instructor was a woman named Elena Rodriguez, probably in her 40s, with paint-stained fingernails and the kind of easy smile that made you feel immediately welcome. "Welcome, everyone," she said, as we settled into our seats around tables covered with paper and supplies. "Before we begin, I want each of you to think about why you're here. What brought you to this class? What are you hoping to discover or create or explore?" When it was my turn to share, I found myself saying words I hadn't planned. "I'm here because I just realized I don't know who I am when I'm not taking care of someone else, and I want to find out." Elena nodded, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "That's a beautiful reason to create art," she said. "Art is one of the purest forms of self-expression. It can help us discover parts of ourselves we didn't know existed." For the next 2 hours, I lost myself in mixing colors and learning about light and shadow and the way water moves across paper. My first painting was terrible, a muddy, shapeless attempt at a landscape that looked like nothing found in nature. But I didn't care. For those 2 hours, I wasn't Tobias's mother or a nurse who solved other people's problems. I was just Abigail, trying something new, making something with my own hands. When I got home that night, my phone was flashing with a message. For just a moment, my heart jumped, thinking it might be Tobias finally reaching out. But it was just a robocall about my car's extended warranty. The disappointment was sharp, but brief. I was starting to understand that healing meant letting go of the constant hope that things would go back to the way they used to be. Things would never be the way they used to be, and maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. The next week, I signed up for a book club at the library. The week after that, I made an appointment to get my hair cut and styled in a way I'd never tried before. Shorter, more modern, more intentional. When I looked in the mirror afterward, I saw a woman I almost didn't recognize. Not younger exactly, but more present, more there. "You look amazing," Carla said when I stopped by her house to show off my new haircut. "You look like yourself again." "I think I'm starting to figure out who that is," I said. It had been 3 weeks since I'd heard from Tobias, and while the silence still hurt, it was beginning to feel less like rejection and more like space. Space to remember that I had value beyond what I could give to other people. Space to discover interests and dreams that had nothing to do with being someone's mother. That evening, as I was practicing the watercolor techniques Elena had taught us, my phone rang. My heart still jumped when I saw Tobias's name on the screen, but this time, I didn't answer immediately. I let it ring 3 times while I decided whether I was ready for whatever conversation was about to happen. When I finally picked up, his voice sounded different, strained, maybe even nervous. "Mom? It's me." "Hello, Tobias. We need to talk. I'm listening. Not on the phone. Can I come over? Tonight?" I looked around my living room, at the art supplies scattered on my coffee table, at the books from my book club stacked on the side table, at the new throw pillows I'd bought just because I liked them. This space was starting to feel like mine again, and I wasn't sure I was ready to let him back into it just yet. "Tomorrow evening would be better," I said. "After 7. "Okay, tomorrow at 7. "Mom?" "Yes?" "Things are complicated right now." "They usually are," I said quietly. After he hung up, I sat there looking at my half-finished painting, a sunset over water that was slowly taking shape under my amateur hands. Tomorrow, I would find out what Tobias wanted from me now. But tonight, I was going to finish this painting and remember that I was a complete person with my own dreams and value, regardless of what anyone else needed from me. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt ready for whatever came next. Tobias arrived at exactly 7 o'clock the next evening, and the first thing I noticed was how terrible he looked. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, wrinkled shirt, unshaven face, dark circles under his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. This wasn't the confident, successful young man who had brought Isabella home 2 years ago. This was someone who looked defeated, desperate, and much younger than his 26 years. "Come in," I said, stepping aside to let him into the house where he'd grown up. He paused in the doorway, looking around the living room with obvious confusion. The space had changed significantly in the past month. Gone were the formal furniture arrangements and family photos that had dominated every surface. Instead, there were art supplies on the coffee table, new books scattered around, colorful throw pillows that actually reflected my taste instead of some neutral palette I'd thought was appropriate. "You redecorated," he said, and there was something almost accusatory in his voice, as if I'd broken some unspoken rule by changing things. "I made it more mine," I corrected, settling into my chair. "Not the couch where we used to sit together, but my own space. Would you like some coffee?" "No, I'm good." He sat on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped between his knees, looking for all the world like a child who'd been called to the principal's office. For a moment, we just looked at each other across the space that had once felt so familiar and now seemed charged with unspoken tension. "You look different," he said finally. "I am different. Your hair. I cut it. I like it shorter." He nodded, but I could see him struggling to reconcile this version of me with the mother he thought he knew, the one who never changed anything without asking his opinion first, who kept everything exactly the same in case he needed to come home. "Mom, we need to talk about what happened, about the money situation." "Which part?" I asked calmly. "The part where you got married without telling me, or the part where your wife called me for money, or the part where you both stopped speaking to me when I said no?" He winced. "All of it, I guess." "I'm listening." Tobias took a deep breath, and when he started talking, the words came out in a rush, like he'd been rehearsing this speech for days. "Isabella's pregnant." The words hung in the air between us, and I felt my chest tighten with a complex mix of emotions. Joy at the thought of becoming a grandmother, hurt that I was hearing this news under these circumstances, and fear about what this meant for all of us. "How far along?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "About 8 weeks. We found out right after our last conversation. Congratulations." I meant it, despite everything. "How are you both feeling about it?" "Terrified," he said honestly. "We can barely afford our rent, I still don't have a job, and now there's going to be a baby to think about. And you want my help." "I need your help, Mom. We need your help." There it was, the real reason for this visit. Not to apologize, not to rebuild our relationship, not to include me in the joy of expecting their first child. They needed something from me, and all the rest of this was just preamble. "What kind of help are you looking for, Tobias?" We think maybe she and the baby could stay here with you for a while, just until I find a job and we get back on our feet financially." I stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said. Isabella, who had excluded me from their wedding, who had treated me like an inconvenience, who had given me the silent treatment for weeks, wanted to move into my house. "Isabella wants to move in here? It would just be temporary. A few months, maybe 6 at the most. And it would be good for you too, Mom. You'd get to be close to your grandchild, help out with the baby. Help out with the baby. Not be a grandmother, not share in this experience, but help out. Like I would be the hired help in my own home." And where would Isabella sleep? Where would the baby's room be? Well, we thought, since you have that guest room that you never use, Isabella could stay there. And the baby could sleep in there too, at least at first. The guest room. The room that had been Tobias's when he was growing up, that I'd kept exactly the same for years in case he ever wanted to come home. The room I'd only recently started thinking of as space for my own purposes. "I see. And what about you? Where would you be during this time?" Tobias looked uncomfortable. "I'd stay in our apartment. Someone needs to maintain the lease, and I'd be job hunting full-time, but I'd visit whenever I could. So Isabella and the baby would live here, and you'd visit whenever you could." I repeated his words slowly, trying to make sure I understood. "Like I'd be running a free boarding house for your wife and child while you handle the important business of your life somewhere else." "It's not like that. What is it like, Tobias?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was smaller, more honest. "Mom, I don't know what else to do. Isabella's parents cut her off financially when they found out about the pregnancy. They think we're too young, too irresponsible. Her mother won't even take her calls right now." Interesting. So Isabella's family had standards and boundaries. They were willing to withdraw support when their daughter made choices they didn't approve of. But I was expected to provide unconditional support no matter how badly I was treated. Why did they cut her off? Because we got married without telling them. Because we're not financially stable. Because they think Isabella should have married someone from their social circle instead of me. Instead of the son of a black nurse from Ashbourne? His face flushed. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. We sat in silence for a moment, and I could see him struggling with something he didn't want to say. Mom, Isabella's family, they have very specific ideas about things, about who belongs in their world and who doesn't. And you went along with that? When you planned your wedding, when you decided I wasn't important enough to be included, you were accommodating their racist assumptions about your family? It wasn't racist. What would you call it? Tobias looked away, unable to meet my eyes. They just wanted something small and private, but not too private to include Isabella's college roommate from New York, not too private to include her cousin from California, not too private to include 15 of their closest friends, just private enough to exclude the black woman who raised you. That's not how it was. Then tell me how it was, Tobias. Explain to me why Isabella's sorority sisters were more important to have at your wedding than your own mother. The question hung between us, and I watched my son struggle to find an answer that wouldn't force him to admit the truth we both knew. They understand our world, he said finally, quietly. And I don't? You don't understand what it's like to navigate their social expectations, their family dynamics. Everything is so complicated with them. But it's simple with me, right? I'm the simple one who's always there, always supportive, always willing to overlook being disrespected as long as you need something from me. Mom, please. This isn't about choosing sides or anything like that. This is about survival right now. We need help, and your family. Family. After weeks of being treated like I wasn't family, now I was family again because they needed something. Where was my family status when you were planning your wedding? Where was my family status when you gave me the silent treatment for 3 weeks because I didn't immediately solve your financial problems? I know we made mistakes. Stop. I held up my hand. Don't say we made mistakes like this was some series of unfortunate misunderstandings. You made choices, Tobias. Deliberate, conscious choices about what kind of relationship you wanted with me. You chose to exclude me from your wedding. You chose to let Isabella treat me with disrespect. You chose to punish me with silence when I didn't give you money. These weren't mistakes. They were decisions. Tears were forming in his eyes now, and for a moment I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who came to me with scraped knees and hurt feelings, trusting that I would make everything better. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about all of it. I know I messed up. What are you sorry for, specifically? I'm sorry about the wedding. I'm sorry we didn't include you. I'm sorry about how Isabella talks to you sometimes. I'm sorry about the silent treatment. It was something, but it wasn't enough. These felt like words he thought I wanted to hear, not genuine understanding of what he'd done or why it was wrong. Why are you sorry, Tobias? What do you understand now that you didn't understand before? He was quiet for a long time, thinking. I understand that you deserved better from us, from me, especially. And I understand that you're not just there to solve our problems. You're a person with feelings and needs, and we've been treating you like what? Like an ATM with emotions. The phrase was so accurate, so brutally honest, that it took my breath away. At least he could see it now, even if it had taken a crisis to open his eyes. So, what's different now? I asked. Why should I believe that things would be different if I help you again? Because I see it now. I see how badly we've treated you, and I don't want to be that person anymore. I want to be the son you deserve. And Isabella? Does she see it too? Tobias looked uncomfortable again. She's struggling right now. With the pregnancy, with her family cutting her off, with everything. She's not in the best headspace to examine her behavior. There it was. He was asking me to help someone who still didn't think she'd done anything wrong. Someone who would be living in my house while pregnant and hormonal and probably even more demanding than usual. Tobias, I need you to understand something. I love you. I will always love you. You're my son, and nothing will ever change that. But I won't go back to being the person I was before, the one who accepted disrespect and took whatever scraps of affection you were willing to give me just because I was grateful to be included at all. I know, I get that now. Do you? Because what you're asking me to do is take in someone who has shown me nothing but contempt, who excluded me from the most important day of your life, who called me only when she needed money. You're asking me to open my home to someone who fundamentally doesn't respect me, but she's carrying your grandchild. And there it was, the emotional manipulation I'd been waiting for. The trump card that was supposed to make me forget everything that had happened and agree to whatever they needed. Yes, she is, and I'm happy about that, truly. But my grandchild isn't going to fix the problems in our relationship, Tobias. And I won't use a baby as an excuse to accept unacceptable behavior from its parents. So what are you saying? I took a deep breath, knowing that what I said next would change everything between us, possibly forever. I'm saying that if you want me in your life, in your child's life, then you need to earn that privilege. Both of you. You need to show me, through your actions, not your words, that you value me as more than just a resource to be tapped when times get tough. How do we do that? You start by treating me with basic respect. You include me in important decisions instead of excluding me and then expecting me to clean up the mess afterward. You acknowledge when you've hurt me instead of punishing me for having feelings about it. And Isabella? Isabella needs to apologize to me. Not because you tell her to, but because she understands that she's wronged me and wants to make it right. Until that happens, she's not welcome in my home. Tobias looks stricken. Mom, she's pregnant. She has nowhere else to go. She has the same place she's been living for the past year. She has friends. She has options. What she doesn't have is the right to treat me badly and then expect me to rescue her when her other support systems fail. You're really going to turn your back on your own grandchild? The words were meant to hurt, and they did, but they also made me angry. I'm not turning my back on anyone. I'm establishing boundaries. I'm saying that my love and support come with the expectation of basic human decency, and that's not negotiable anymore. We sat in silence for several minutes, and I could see Tobias processing everything I'd said, trying to figure out how to get what he needed without meeting my conditions. Finally, he stood up. I need to think about this, he said. Take all the time you need. But understand that this isn't a negotiation, Tobias. These are my terms for having a relationship with me. You can accept them or not, but they're not going to change. He headed toward the door, then turned back. What if Isabella can't do what you're asking? What if she can't apologize or treat you the way you want to be treated? Then you'll have to decide what's more important to you. Your wife's pride or your relationship with your mother and your child's relationship with their grandmother. After he left, I sat in my living room surrounded by the evidence of my new life, my art supplies, my books, my chosen decorations, and felt both heartbroken and proud. Heartbroken because I'd just potentially lost my son and grandchild. Proud because I'd finally stood up for myself and demanded the respect I deserved. The old me would have caved, would have accepted whatever crumbs they were willing to offer just to be included in their lives. But the new me, the me who had remembered her own worth, knew that some things were more important than avoiding conflict. My relationship with myself was one of those things. 6 weeks passed without a word from Tobias or Isabella, and for the first time in my adult life, I stopped waiting for my phone to ring. Instead, I threw myself into the life I was building, my real life, not the one I'd constructed around other people's needs and expectations. My watercolor skills improved week by week, and Elena had started displaying some of my pieces in the community college's art showcase. I'd joined 2 book clubs now, made friends with 3 women from my painting class, and had even gone on 2 coffee dates with a man named James Morrison, who worked at the library. James was kind and intelligent, a widower like me who understood what it meant to rebuild your life after loss. He made me laugh, listened when I talked about my struggles with Tobias, and never once made me feel like I needed to apologize for having boundaries or expectations. "You're glowing," Carla said one evening as we sat on her front porch, watching the sunset and sharing a bottle of wine I'd brought back from a weekend trip to the mountains, my first real vacation in 20 years. "I feel different," I admitted. "Lighter, somehow. Like I'd been carrying around this weight for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. That's what happens when you stop trying to earn love from people who should give it freely." It was a Tuesday evening in late November when Isabella showed up at my door. I almost didn't recognize her at first. The polished, confident young woman I'd known had been replaced by someone who looked exhausted and vulnerable. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was wearing sweatpants and an oversized hoodie, and her eyes were red-rimmed like she'd been crying. She was also visibly pregnant now, about 14 weeks along, I calculated, with a small but definite bump that she kept touching nervously with one hand. "Hello, Abigail," she said quietly. "I was wondering if we could talk." I'd imagined this moment many times over the past 6 weeks, rehearsed what I might say if either of them showed up at my door. But seeing Isabella like this, stripped of her usual armor of privilege and attitude, I felt something I hadn't expected: compassion. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. She followed me into the living room and sat on the edge of the couch, looking around at the changes I'd made to the space. Her eyes lingered on the paintings I'd hung on the walls, my own work, scenes of mountains and flowers and abstract splashes of color that made me happy. "You painted these?" she asked. "I did. They're beautiful. Thank you." We sat in silence for a moment, and I could see her struggling to find the words she'd come to say. "Tobias told me about your conversation," she said finally, "about your conditions for us being in your life. And I've been thinking about it. About everything, really. About how I've treated you, about the wedding, about the way I've acted since I met you." I waited, not wanting to interrupt whatever process was happening for her. "I was raised to believe that some people matter more than others," she continued, her voice getting smaller. "My parents, my whole family, they taught me that there was a hierarchy to relationships, that you should prioritize people based on their social status, their wealth, their usefulness to your advancement. This was the most honest Isabella had ever been with me, and I found myself leaning forward, genuinely listening. When I met Tobias, I fell in love with him, but I also saw him as a project, someone I could shape to fit into my world, someone who could prove that I was open-minded and progressive while still maintaining my position in the social circles I was used to. And his mother didn't fit into that picture. She looked down at her hands. "No, you didn't. And instead of examining why that was wrong, I just tried to minimize your presence in our lives. I told myself that Tobias didn't need you as much anymore, that he'd outgrown his childhood relationships, that what we were building together was more important than what he'd had before, including his relationship with me, including his relationship with you. And I convinced him to see it that way too. I made him feel like choosing you meant rejecting me, like he couldn't have both of us in his life in the way he wanted. This was painful to hear, but it was also validating. I'd known that Isabella was driving the wedge between Tobias and me, but hearing her admit it made me feel less crazy, less like I'd imagined the whole dynamic. "The wedding was my idea," she continued. "I told Tobias that having a small, intimate ceremony would be more romantic, more meaningful. But really, I just didn't want to deal with explaining you to my family and friends. I didn't want to answer questions about your job or your background or why you were different from them. Because I'm black," she flinched. "Yes. Because you're black, because you're working class, because you didn't fit the image I had in my head of what a mother-in-law should be like. And that's completely, inexcusably wrong." I appreciated her honesty, but I could also hear the coaching in her words, the careful way she was acknowledging each point as if she'd practiced this speech, which she probably had. "What changed?" I asked. "Why are you telling me this now?" Isabella was quiet for a long time, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. "My parents disowned me, completely. When they found out about the pregnancy, when they realized that Tobias and I weren't going to break up and that this was my real life, they cut me off entirely. No financial support, no emotional support, no contact at all. I'm sorry. The thing is, I went to them expecting them to help us. I'd been raised to believe that family takes care of family, that parents support their children no matter what. And when they refused, when they told me I'd made my bed and now I had to lie in it, I was devastated." She looked up at me then, and I could see the realization dawning in her eyes. "And then I thought about you, about how you've supported Tobias his entire life, how you sacrificed for him, how you loved him unconditionally. And I thought about how we'd treated you when we needed help, how we'd expected you to just solve our problems without offering you anything in return. You expected me to be different from your parents. I expected you to be better than my parents. But I didn't think you deserved to be treated better than my parents treat me. It was a profound observation, and I could see that she was genuinely grappling with the contradiction. When my parents cut me off, I realized what it felt like to be abandoned by the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. And I understood that I'd been asking you to love us unconditionally while treating you like you were conditional. I was quiet, processing what she was saying. This felt different from the apology I'd expected, more thoughtful, more genuine. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Isabella continued. I'm not asking you to help us or let me move in here or fix our problems. I'm just here to tell you that I understand now why what I did was wrong. And I'm sorry. Really, genuinely sorry. What are you asking for then? I'm asking for a chance to start over, to build a relationship with you based on who you actually are instead of who I thought you should be. To include you in our lives in a way that honors your importance to Tobias and your role as this baby's grandmother. She placed her hand on her belly again, and for the first time, I allowed myself to think about the little person growing inside her, my grandchild, who would need love and stability and family connections. That sounds good in theory, I said carefully. But how do I know this isn't just about the fact that your parents aren't available to help you anymore? How do I know you won't go back to excluding me and dismissing me as soon as you don't need my support? You don't know, she said simply. You'll have to watch what I do, not just listen to what I say. And if I backslide, if I start treating you poorly again, then you should absolutely maintain your boundaries and protect yourself. It was a surprisingly mature answer, and I found myself feeling something I hadn't expected. Hope. What about Tobias? Where does he stand on all of this? Tobias is struggling. He feels torn between loyalty to me and guilt about you, and he doesn't know how to navigate it. But he loves you, Abigail. He really does. And he wants to find a way back to having a real relationship with you. But he's scared. He's scared that he's damaged things too badly to fix them. He's scared that you don't want him in your life anymore. I thought about that. Did I want Tobias in my life? The answer was complicated. I wanted the son I thought I'd raised, the one who was kind and thoughtful and valued family. I didn't want the son who had excluded me from his wedding and punished me with silence when I didn't immediately solve his problems. I want him in my life, I said finally, but I want the real him, not the version of himself he thinks other people want to see. And I want him to want me in his life for who I am, not just for what I can do for him. Isabella nodded. I think he's starting to understand that. Losing you, really losing you, has made him realize how much he took you for granted. We talked for another hour about the pregnancy, about their living situation, about what it might look like to rebuild our relationships on a foundation of mutual respect instead of obligation and guilt. When Isabella left that evening, she hugged me, the first time she'd ever initiated physical contact between us, and whispered, "Thank you for listening. Thank you for not giving up on us completely." 2 days later, Tobias called. "Mom, it's me. Isabella told me she came to see you." "She did. How did that go?" "It was good," I said honestly. "Different than I expected. She said you were willing to talk about trying again. With all of us. I'm willing to see what happens if we all commit to doing better. I want to do better, Mom. I want to be the son you deserve, and I want to be a father my child can be proud of. What does that look like to you?" "It looks like including you in things that matter. It looks like standing up for you when other people treat you badly. It looks like appreciating what you've given me instead of just expecting it. And it looks like accepting that you're a complete person with your own life and your own needs, not just someone who exists to help me with mine." These were the words I'd been waiting to hear for months, maybe years. Not just "I'm sorry," but "I understand what I did wrong and why it was wrong." "I'd like that very much," I said. Over the next several months, we all worked to rebuild what had been broken. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. There were setbacks and misunderstandings and moments when I wondered if we were all just going through the motions. But slowly, something real began to emerge. Isabella started calling me just to talk, sharing stories about her pregnancy symptoms and asking for advice about things like cribs and car seats. She included me in doctor's appointments and baby-related shopping trips. She asked my opinion on names and nursery colors and whether I thought they should find out the baby's gender or wait for a surprise. More importantly, she started treating me like a person whose thoughts and feelings mattered. When I told her I'd prefer not to be called Grandma because it made me feel old, she didn't roll her eyes or dismiss my preference. Instead, she asked what I'd like to be called and then actually used the name I chose, Nana Abby. Tobias began including me in their major decisions. When they decided to move to a bigger apartment, he asked for my input on neighborhoods and took me to see the place before they signed the lease. When he got a new job at a different engineering firm, he called me first to share the news. When they started talking about marriage counseling to work through some of their communication issues, he asked if I thought it was a good idea. But the most meaningful change was in the way he started seeing me as a complete person. He asked about my painting classes and actually came to see my work at the community college's art show. He met James and, after some initial awkwardness, genuinely seemed to approve of my dating someone. He started remembering my birthday and Mother's Day, not because Isabella reminded him, but because they mattered to him. In March, Isabella gave birth to a beautiful baby girl they named Sophia Grace. I was there for the birth, not because they needed me to help with anything, but because they wanted me to be part of the experience. Holding my granddaughter for the first time, looking into her tiny face and seeing traces of both her parents and something uniquely her own, I felt a completeness I hadn't experienced in years. Not because Sophia filled some void in my life, I'd learned to fill those voids myself, but because she represented hope. Hope that this next generation might grow up in a family that valued each person for who they were, not just what they could provide. "She's perfect," I whispered, touching her impossibly small fingers. "She is," Isabella agreed, looking exhausted but radiant. "And she's so lucky to have you as her Nana Abby." As I sat in that hospital room, surrounded by my son and his wife and their new daughter, I thought about how different this moment was from what I'd imagined a year ago. A year ago, I thought happiness meant being needed, meant being indispensable to other people's lives. Now I understood that real happiness came from being valued, not needed, from being chosen, not just depended upon, from being loved for who I was, not just what I could give. 6 months later, I had my first solo art show at a gallery in downtown Ashbourne. It was a small show, just 12 paintings, but it represented something much larger than my artistic development. It represented my emergence as a complete person, someone with her own dreams and talents and value. Tobias and Isabella came to the opening, bringing Sophia in her carrier and spending the entire evening beaming with pride as they introduced me to other attendees as the artist, my mother, and my incredibly talented mother-in-law. James was there too, along with Carla and my friends from book club and painting class. Looking around that room at all the people who had supported my journey towards self-discovery, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "You did this," Carla said, squeezing my hand as we stood in front of my favorite piece, a vibrant sunset that I'd painted after one of my weekend mountain trips. "You chose yourself, and look what happened." She was right. I had chosen myself, probably for the first time in my adult life, and in doing so, I'd created space for healthier relationships, for genuine love and respect, for a life that belonged to me instead of just serving other people's needs. That night, as I was taking down my paintings and packing them carefully for the trip home, Tobias approached me with something like shyness in his expression. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think Sophia will be proud of me when she's older? The way I should have been proud of you all along?" It was such a vulnerable question, and it made me realize how much he'd grown over the past year. "I think Sophia will be proud of the father you're becoming," I said. "The one who's learning to value the people he loves, who's working to be better instead of just expecting to be forgiven. I want to be someone she can look up to." "Then keep doing what you're doing. Keep choosing love over convenience, relationship over transaction, honesty over comfort." He hugged me then, the way he used to when he was little and needed reassurance about something that scared him. "I love you, Mom. I'm sorry it took me so long to show it properly. I love you too, baby, and I'm proud of the man you're becoming." As I drove home that night, my car full of paintings and my heart full of peace, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, the one who measured her worth by how much other people needed her. who accepted scraps of affection and called it love, who had forgotten that she was a complete person outside of her role as someone's mother. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more self-aware, more complete. Someone who knew the difference between being loved and being used, between being valued and being taken for granted. I'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst behavior. That setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's necessary. That choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's the foundation for every other healthy choice you'll ever make. My relationship with Tobias and Isabella would never be perfect. We would always be learning, always working to do better, always navigating the complex dynamics of family and love and mutual respect. But it was real now, built on honest communication and genuine appreciation instead of guilt and obligation. And I had my own life to sustain me. My art, my friendships, my relationship with James, my sense of purpose and identity that existed independent of anyone else's needs or approval. Sophia would grow up knowing a grandmother who was whole, who modeled self-respect and self-care, who showed her that women could be loving and nurturing while still maintaining their own boundaries and dreams. That felt like the greatest gift I could give her, and the greatest gift I had finally learned to give myself.